on Shakespeare's language, 20 minutes on Shakespeare's language. That's kind of impossible, but I'm going to look at just closely a couple of things because mostly because we all really appreciate this author. And I think by focusing on a couple of specific things in Shakespeare's writing, Shakespeare's language, we get an even bigger appreciation to see the background. This writer had some history in writing, and also to see why this writer is different from other writers. So I'm just going to mention a few things. One, a little bit about words, because that's what language is, but also Shakespeare's language involves meter, involves rhetoric. I'm going to look at a couple of those more closely. This is an example of secretary hand that Roger was talking about. This is the handwriting that plays were written in. Just a little bit about words, because a lot has been said about the neologisms, the new words that Shakespeare made up. What I find more interesting is the vocabulary that the author used of not made up words. So I'm going to scroll through a list of about 25 words, and I'd like you to count in your head, oh, Shakespeare never used that word. Shakespeare didn't use that word. How many words in this list did Shakespeare not use? And none of these are new words invented by Shakespeare. So I can't see the chat. So however many you thought, there are actually 2 words in that list that Shakespeare did not make up. Supercalifragilistic, of course, and superb. Shakespeare never used the word superb. The other thing about words I find intriguing in Shakespeare is I'm going to show you this list of tears. Shakespeare uses the word tears more than 420 times. And every single time there is a different adjective. Look at the number of adjectives over a course of 25 or 30 years for tears. I don't even know how you would do that without a database of, oh, I've used this word before. I want to talk more about meter because the words is an obvious thing that we all get, but meter is the underlying structure that Shakespeare writes on. And also called verse in Shakespeare. When it's a 10-syllable line, it's called verse as opposed to prose. But this is what Yeats said about his work. It gave me a devil of a lot of trouble to get the poems into verse. And that is why I will not read them as though they were prose. And I would suggest that Shakespeare probably felt the same way, because there's a lot of trouble. I'm going to give you a 2-minute lesson on iambic pentameter, just so that you can see the next time you read a play or you go to a play and you think, oh my gosh, 3,000 to 4,000 lines with this underlying structure and everything's built on that. It's amazing. So formal poetry is made of feet. Each foot is a number of syllables with a particular emphasis. English is a very syllabic language. We depend a lot on what syllable words have in them, as opposed to something like Japanese. So in English, the word produce, the accent on the first syllable, produce, is a completely different word from produce. That's how important the syllable marking is. So within that structure of feet, there's a foot called an I am. It has 2 syllables, emphasis on the second syllable. Forget, delight, return. My name, Robin, is just the opposite. It's not an I am. So each foot is an I am, yeah? Ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. Penta means 5. Each foot has 2 syllables. Thus, there are 10 syllables per line. So the meter is 5. The meter is 5 I ams. This is the basic 72% of Shakespeare's lines in the entire canon are using this underneath. So it comes out like this. First line of Merchant of Venice. In sooth, I know not why I am so sad. Of course, nobody's going to say, in sooth, I know not why I am so sad. But you can still hear that in sooth, I know not why I am so sad. Here's 5 feet. Each one is an I am. This is not an unusual rhythm, an unnatural rhythm. I'm going to the store to buy some bread. It's perfect iambic pentameter. I'm going to the store to buy some bread. So those were, a lot of those were monosyllables. Of course, Shakespeare isn't written in monosyllables. When it is, you need to pay attention. Ingratitude, thou marble-hearted fiend. Ingratitude, thou marble-hearted fiend. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. Even words like the multitudinous seas in Carnadine, or in acclamations hyperbolical, Shakespeare arranges those words to fit on that meter. What the one thing that the meter does, it tells us how things are pronounced. We know it's not Prospero, as I pronounced it many years ago, because I didn't know any better. You did supplant your brother Prospero. The Earl of Westmoreland set forth today. We can't say, every time Shakespeare takes that 3-syllable word, Westmoreland, it is positioned in the line so that it reads, the Earl of Westmoreland set forth today. And that's how we can know words we don't know what they are, like who the heck is that person? On purpose trimmed up for Semiramis. So we've been using that pronunciation, using the meter for pronunciation for hundreds of years. If we're going to trust it for pronunciation, we should trust it for meaning. When Decius Brutus comes in to tell Julius Caesar time to go to the Capitol and get assassinated, Caesar tells them this, and I have heard this read, I've heard it on stage, something like, and tell them that I will not come today. Not, thinking not is a big word. What Shakespeare actually wrote is, and tell them that I will not come today. There's a big difference between I will not and I will not. Caesar clarifies this a couple lines later. The cause is in my will. I will not come. Now this happens throughout the plays, thousands of times, where there are these subtle little differences or subtle little emphases on words that Shakespeare's wanting you to look at. But the fun stuff is when Shakespeare interrupts this meter. This is when Albany discovers, took him long enough, that his wife is an evil person. And this is not ba-bum, ba-bump. It's bump-bump. Wisdom and goodness, filth, savor, but tigers, not daughters. Shakespeare's not going to make you say tigers. When Shakespeare disturbs the meter, there is always a reason. Here we're seeing Albany getting upset. There are lots of kinds of disturbances. This is another foot, a 2-syllable foot that has no emphasis. This is a 2-syllable foot that has 2 emphases. The combination, this has a word, this no emphasis. This has a word, 2 syllables, both emphasized. The combination of the 2 of them is another word. But when Shakespeare uses this, we get to have two words in a row that has an emphasis in the rank sweat of an enseamed bed. Feminine endings, thousands of feminine endings where there's an 11th syllable, to be or not to be, that is the question. That happens a lot, usually has a meaning. You need to look for that. Short lines, Macbeth sees the dagger. This is not a short line that's shared by somebody else who's speaking the other half. It's just a short line. And you need to say, wow, why is it a short line? Headless lines. This is not uncommon that the first syllable is actually missing in the line. It means something. Broken back lines. Or come you with her show and in time. We can't do that. But if we add the missing syllable as a pause, or come you with her show, pause, and in time, it comes out perfect. Shakespeare does this a lot. You need to watch for them. Well, if you're interested, I know not everybody's that interested in going this deep into it. Here's a funny thing that Shakespeare did. When we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause, there are two syllables missing right after the word pause. Ha ha ha. Must give us pause, beat, there's a respect. There's a magical meter that is not iambic at all. If iambic is in sooth, I know not why I am so sad. A trochee is just the opposite. Captain of our fairy band, Helena is here at hand, and the youth mistook by me, pleading for a lover's fee. And this magical meter is only used, Shakespeare's very specific about it. It's magic. Double, double, toil and trouble. Ariel uses it sometimes. This is from Midsummer Night's Dream, of course. Prospero throws away his books and his book and his staff in this magical meter. There are a couple other places where it's used, but Shakespeare's specific about it, doesn't just randomly use it. There are 12 syllable lines called Alexandrines. Now here's a funny thing Shakespeare did, another joke. In Love's Labour's Lost, there's a play within a play. Sir Nathaniel is playing the part of Alexander the Great, and Shakespeare wrote Alexandrines for Alexander the Great. 6 syllables, 6 syllables. If love make me forsworn, how shall I swear to love? I thought that was kind of hilarious. In Midsummer Night's Dream, Quince, the stage carpenter, and Bottom argue about how they're going to write the prologue. Quince says we should write it in 8 and 6. Bottom says, no, we should write it in 8 and 8. Here's an example of 8 and 6 in Cymbeline. The ghosts come in to talk to the ghost of Posthumus's family comes in. And this is the sound of 8 and 6. Now, unfortunately, many editors just stretch it out into one 14-syllable line. The technical term for a 14-syllable line is a 14er. But in the folio and the quarto, both, it's set just like this. 8 lines, indented, 6 lines. 8 lines, 6 lines, short line. So something about it has a slightly different lilt. Lucina lent me not her aid, but took me in my throes. That from me was Posthumus ripped, came crying amongst his foes. A thing of pity. We also see that Posthumus is pronounced posthumous, not posthumous. So all of the ghosts in this scene speak in this meter. So it becomes sort of an incantatory, different moment, very different moment with this other meter. Boyette in Love's Labour's Lost has, my goodness, why is he doing this? This is not iambic at all. It's not trochaic. I'm going to read it in a kind of an exaggerated way that the rhythm is, and you will recognize the rhythm. Why, all his behaviors did make their retire to the court of his eye, peeping thorough desire, his heart like an agate with your print impressed. Does that sound familiar? 'Twas the night before Christmas, and all through the house, to the court of his eye, peeping thorough desire. So you have to wonder when you run across this, why is Boyette speaking this way? Why does Boyette have this section where he's speaking in this meter? All of these interruptions in the regular iambic pentameter, you need to question. When I was a student under Bill doing the MA authorship, I made some visual meter charts because I was curious to see if we could visually see what the meter looks like. Does it look different between different authors? This is not Shakespeare. This is the Spanish tragedy, probably by Kidd. And you can. This is how, not very elegantly, but da 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 ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum. Now you can see that Kidd is very specific about this. He's kind of slavish to this. I checked two other pieces later on in the play. He never deviates from this, almost never. Every single line is end stopped, meaning there's a punctuation at the end. These are rhymes. Shakespeare is very specific about rhymes. Every other author I checked in on sort of randomly sticks rhymes. It's like, oh, looky, I made a rhyme. So this is an example of what it looks like if it's slavishly matching iambic pentameter. This is Two Gentlemen of Verona, considered to be Shakespeare's very first play. The very first line of the very first scene. Shakespeare's playing with this meter. Cease to persuade, my loving Proteus, home-keeping youth have ever homely wits. We've got some 11 syllable lines here. Already, this author is feeling comfortable enough with meter to deviate from it. This is somebody who this is not their first thing they did. What was fun to see visually is when there's disturbance in the meter. This is Shylock. Antonio has come to ask him for money, and his meter is interrupted quite a bit. Now look at this. Oh my goodness. This is a clue to the reader, to the actor. Then he kind of pulls it together here, but he does have a short line. Antonio, in his response, directly following this, oh, look at that nice, smooth, calm meter. Winter's Tale, a late play. This first part is Camillo trying to calm the king down. And this is Leontes going insane. Look at all this punctuation in here, all these question marks, two long lines. So it gives us a confidence. It gives me a confidence that when Shakespeare disrupts the meter, there is a reason for that. There is a point. King Lear at the end of when Cordelia is dying. Look at that. Never, 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 never. So listen to the meter. The meter tells the reader, the actor, so much. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Just 2 minutes on, well, 3 maybe, on rhetoric. Stephen Keller did a book on the development of Shakespeare's rhetoric, and he recently did an article on the rhetorical fingerprint of Shakespeare in Titus Andronicus, confirming what he thinks as the collaboration of Peele, based on the rhetoric. Now, rhetoric we think today is, bad stuff, but up until recently, rhetoric is the art of persuasion. It's arranging words in such a way that you can convince the hearer, the reader, of your point of view. This is what Quintilian said over 2,000 years ago. Rhetorical figures, and Shakespeare mentions figures several times, give power to our words to strengthen the argument, increase in interest, communicate the most proper and careful way. In Keller's extensive study, he says there are an average of one rhetorical device per line in Shakespeare. There are more than 200 devices, 200 figures. Sister Miriam Joseph has a book that catalogs more than 200 of them. I'm going to show you 5 of them. And the average of one means that some lines Shakespeare uses 2, 3, or 4 rhetorical devices at a time. These are so much fun to start noticing and playing with, because it's it's layered on top of that structure of the meter. Antithesis is one rhetorical device Shakespeare uses all the time. Look at this: drown versus plant, sorrow versus joy, dead versus living, grave versus throne. 4 antitheses in 2 lines. There are about 3 other rhetorical devices built into that. At the crux of The Winter's Tale, when things change, we have this beautiful things dying, things new, things dying, things newborn, and the play turns. The thing about these rhetorical devices too is that they're not random. Shakespeare uses them for a point. And Keller could prove that other writers don't use them in quite the same way. They're not as pointed in their use. Epistrophe is the repetition of a word at the ends of the phrases. This is when Bassanio saying, she got the ring. I gave the ring, I gave the ring, I gave the ring, I left the ring, but the ring. And she responds with the virtue of the ring, gave the ring, contained the ring, with the ring. The 10th syllable is one of the most important syllables in the iambic pentameter line. And it's the last word in the line. Last words in the lines are very important. You can kind of skim down the end of a line of a speech and get the major points. What happens with epistrophe, especially at the end of a line, well, it's at the end of a phrase, it shows us the value. All this stuff at the end of that play, Merchant of Venice, about the ring, the ring, the ring. Remember how he got that ring? When he won, he guessed which casket her picture was in, which I would argue it was with help. And she says, I give you everything, my house, my mansion, my servants, my gold. I give it all to you with this ring. And if you lose it or you give it away, I will never let you forget it. She does get the ring back. And then the last scene, Shakespeare's reminding us of the importance of this ring. And we need to think about what is the importance of that ring. Epizeuxis. So one reason I love these rhetorical devices, these words are so great. Epizeuxis. It's the repetition of the same word with no others between. Shakespeare often uses that like this with Lear or Macbeth, simply because saying it once is not enough. Antinoclasis, the same word, but it means something different each time. Shakespeare uses this thousands of times. Othello, he's about to murder Desdemona. Put out the light, then put out the light. So the light, what is the light? The light, the candle, Desdemona's spirit of her life. Is it Othello's spirit of his own life? Is it order in the world? And when he puts this light out of the order in the world, chaos will return. As he said earlier, it would. And which is which? We get a lot to talk about in there. Homeotolueton, it's not that important of a device, but I love it because the word is so great. Homeotolueton. This repetition of the sounds, weeping, wailing, crying, howling, ringing, makes each one a little bit bigger and makes them more cohesive and makes us think about them a little bit more. So basically, that's all we have time for. One of my readers described Shakespeare's language as a tapestry in which so many things are layered together. We have the structure of the meter, whether it's verse or prose, we have the rhyme, we have the imagery, the rhetoric, all of this combined makes a fingerprint. I would agree with Stephen Keller. There's a fingerprint of Shakespeare's in this collection of how this writer writes. Thank you.